I thank everyone. We're going to start now the second session, enhancing the transparency and efficiency of public institutions and processes. This is really an extremely important session. Why? Because this is one of the big weaknesses that we have in Egypt. Every word is talking about a weakness. Transparency is a weakness. Efficiency of public institutions is a weakness. Processes are a weakness. All of them are a weakness. And they lie at the core of the real economy and at the core of the institutional reform and governance, without which we cannot possibly have any implementation on the ground. This is the fact, the flagrantly clear reality. I have the honor of having a very powerful panel, and I'm going to ask, in the order of the agenda, I'm going to ask Mr. Janos, the head of the Public Sector Integrity Division, to start the presentation. You have a presentation?
Yes. Thank you so much, and this is really a great pleasure. And 15 years ago, I was participating in a series of dialogues involving the region, Egypt, and bringing closer to the OECD. OECD is a platform for sharing experiences with the MENA countries. So it's particularly a pleasure that coming back and at a very important stage before the OECD would like to develop a country program, so make it very concrete and ensure the high priorities are met, and we, the OECD members, they can transfer and provide all the insights to help you. We prepared presentation, but I prefer to reflect to many of the ideas and keep the conversations alive. So the first is sustainability of reforms. Actually, you also mentioned that the technocratic approaches are necessary. It's very important, so the knowledge base, the data. But without, and this is exactly the experience, without the highest level commitment and leadership, it doesn't work. And it means not only the executive, so the president, prime minister, the cabinet members, but also sustainability requires the involvement of legislators. So long-term vision manifested, for example, in Egypt Vision 2030. And these are really, in the past 3 years, particularly after the 2015-16 reforms, the constant high-level political support is a precondition. Making this manifesto and the vision in formal documents such as the Sustainable Development Strategy. But these are the vision, the statements. And what has been particularly important in the past 3 years, how to operationalize, how to cascade down through the institutional, the coordination mechanisms, forming this chain of working groups, the committee, of course, and the various units in order to define the specific tasks and how to implement, how to coordinate and collaborate. We heard about the difficulties of shifting certain reforms, item-based budgeting to program or performance-based budgeting. The experience of the OECD countries showed that the single most important manifesto of political priorities, this is in the budget. What matters, this is in the budget. But how it matters, how you provide, and returning some answers to the MP's question, shared budget for providing incentives for all partners implementing those goals. How to mainstream in the institutional coordination, for example, making clear responsibilities in the performance of the institution, but also the performance of the individuals, including the political level, that this is a priority. So these are the, I would say, very specific experiences and also the strengths what Egypt started. The not forgetting, the symptoms and making difference between the symptoms and the root causes. The anti-corruption strategy points to many of the specific deficiencies, identifies many of the causes, including the informality, including what are the incentives for informality. And the experience of the OECD countries again, and then also the countries in the region, integrity, safeguarding integrity, or fighting corruption, it's mainstreamed. This is part of a more efficient environment in the public sector, compliance-based strategies and practices in the private sector, risk management to point and mobilize resources to address, identify and address this risk, for example, at the interface of the public and the private sector. And going back to the mother of all the issues, which is the knowledge, the data. Actually, the OECD is a database. We are sharing information, and the leadership of the Ministry of this is the planning, monitoring, and administrative reform. It shows that, of course, the monitoring and evaluation should be mainstreamed, included in all elements, from the vision and planning to the implementation and the revisions. What I like to just mention as the last part of the key strengths, that action actually happens at the subnational level. If you see the spending, over 60% of the state spending happens at the subnational level. So working with the subnational level, the governorates, I think this is a very important and very crucial. So showing some figure and starting with the worldwide governance, so the World Bank indicators, governance indicators, and referring to the effectiveness part. Yes, there's still much to do, and this shows that before the reform, how Egypt actually has been sliding for the effectiveness. So this is the quality of the civil service, the public, this is the public services, the quality of the public services, so the conditions. And the result of the reform actually is shown in the most recent data, for example, the Doing Business, the World Economic Forum, and this is a very promising impact. Another one is a constraint. We heard about causes, how burdensome, how complex are the procedures, the regulatory quality, and it shows again the worldwide governance indicators that Egypt has still much to do. And in that sense, the process involving stakeholders, consulting, engaging, it's similarly important for the quality of the result, so the quality of the policies and the quality of the regulation. So this is the experience, what we can share from OECD members. Key priorities. So what are the directions for making more efficient, more effective the public sector? When we looked at many of the countries, for example, in transition, the single most important factor was the quality, the capacity of the civil service. And this is very sad if we look at, for example, the OECD member countries in the past 10 years, because the financial crisis had a huge impact. We call it, it's a very positive tone, downsizing. Actually, it's really cutting. Many of the countries, they were cutting hundreds of thousands of civil service jobs. And why this is disastrous? Because the best qualified people, they were leaving. So the capacity in that sense, the strategic, really human resource planning and implementation, this is so important to maintain and develop the professionalization and this capacity. A single, again, when we talk civil service commissioner, a single most important measure actually starts at recruitment. How you include the professional criteria in the recruitment and after the promotion and career prospect. In addition to the quality, the professional civil service, we are experiencing the digital transformation. Public service is part of it. Actually, in many cases, could be the leader. Interface public and private sector like procurement. So digital markets, digital, again, licensing, processing, all types of, these are requests from citizens or businesses. So the crafting a digital government strategy, and actually Portugal started even 2 decades ago, a long time, more than 2 decades ago, and as one of the examples, but we could give more information how countries, they do this. Finance, and we need to go back, how important that the public finance management is transparent, understandable, what are the I talked about the budget, what are the priorities, how these are manifested, but also in a conclusion, so this means that as a result of engagement to set the priorities of the society. This is a very inclusive process. We could give many examples, and not only from OECD countries, but Brazil, participatory budgeting. Actually, Paris, the OECD headquarters is in Paris. In the past few years, they are consulting in electronic surveys the citizens to set their priorities for specific, it's almost 5% of the budget is only concentrated on these requests from citizens. And this is just one example. What is similarly important to understand the risks related to the fiscal risk, related to budget, and ensure the quality. So the internal control, internal audit, to ensure, again, the quality of the process, the capacity that the targets are met. This is so fundamental. And we heard about investment. Investment is, of course, in the future. In OECD member countries, around 11% of the public procurement is used for economic investment, so it's a huge amount of money. It's around 2-3% of the GDP. Of course, in developing countries, this is much higher. So providing vision, but also very concrete, specific mechanisms for infrastructure investment. And going back to the regulatory quality, there are a lot of, so shifting to the next, which is the inclusion, and I'd like to just very quickly reflect to the question, where are the women and the youths, the kids? You could see that in the past few years, there were so much done in the strategy level. So for the women, for example, the empowering the Egyptian women, also setting quota, for example, the women's involvement. We could see similar efforts for the youngs, and this is just one data from the ILO to show how significant the difference in the labor participation. So the pay gap, which is calculated around 168 Egyptian pounds between men and women, which is obviously quite significant. and also the level of unemployment for the youngsters. So very quickly, the priorities, and reflecting to the previous discussion, this is linked to, on the one hand, what are the constraints, like the legal constraints. So revisiting many of these regulations related to the women's participation or the youth's participation, whether this is linked to taxation, whether this is linked to access to finance, etc. But also to make formalized, not only ad hoc, but also formalize their engagement. So the engagement of all the stakeholders, including specifically the gender, so the women and the youth in policy making and also rule making. I can give many of the concrete examples, and probably in the discussion I will bring this up, but finishing with 3 key messages. And the first one is our lessons learned that the world is becoming very complex. And this has an implication for planning and sequencing reforms. How to mobilize, we call it the whole of government, so all actors in the government, how to set the priorities and avoid fragmentation in the silos approach in the implementation, of course, and manage the trade-offs. I can give very concrete examples how the center of government, so the center of the president's office, the cabinet office, how they are playing this role. But what we really learned, and this is what we call the governance, or good governance premium, that reforms, they do matter. They not only do matter because how the public sector functions, this has a huge impact on confidence of investors, trust of society in government or policy action. But at the same time, this is also a manifested result. It can bring manifested results. And we had a discussion before how reform measures can impact on individuals. It's really bringing the results back to individuals. So thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the discussion and the debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I do appreciate very much your key messages, whole government approach, the silos, because we are operating in silos for sure, and to have the good governance at the heart of it. Let me just play the devil's advocate in some of the issues that you mentioned, of course, that we're having strategies for women and children, and we have a vision. Our problem is that our strategies have big objectives, big targets that are not translated into a plan of action that you can monitor and KPIs for the implementation. And then this means immediately it's a problem. We have, you said that the part of the spending is coming from the governorates. It's 6% is a very, very small one. We are having a programs budget, performance budget, but we do not have decentralization, which means that we have a very big issue in the implementation. And the public service that we need to modernize badly, we have a step that is still missing. We need to know what is the public service that we need. And we need to have a vision and the government structure that can implement this vision, certain types of public sector, public service, and then build the capacity. But at this point, we're building the capacity of a pool of public service without really being quite sure about it. The transparency of the public finance, I know the Parliament and Sylvia at its head is trying very hard, but we still have a very, very long way to go. Having said this, let me move on to the Ministry of Enterprise Sector. The public sector in Egypt has always been a taboo and a problem. Okay, always a taboo, all right? Even when it's not operating, there is still bleeding that's taking place. I know that there are very serious and daring efforts by the present ministry, headed by His Excellency, Mr. Hisham Tawfiq. Okay, so I'm going to ask you, Ms. Rasha, to say what we're talking about here.
Thank you, Dr. Abla. This is really an honor to share with you some of the views of the Ministry of Public Sector for the reform of the public enterprises in Egypt. Let me first start by elaborating that not all the public sector is under the supervision of the Ministry of Public Business Sector. We are only concerned with around 120 affiliates that they are subsidiaries for 8 holding companies working in different fields like tourism, pharmaceutical industries, chemical and metallurgical industries, spinning and weaving, transport, and insurance. Those companies currently are in total consolidated net profit of around 11.5 billion. We have around 67 profitable companies that they had for the last fiscal year a profit of 18 billion, and around 52 losing companies that they hit a loss of 7.5, making a net of 11.5 approximately the last fiscal year. The public enterprises has been a separate ministry at early the 90s and then merged in the Ministry of Investment in 2004 for around 12 years. And then the government of Egypt has potential for more focusing on enhancing the efficiency of the public enterprises and making it in a separate ministry since 2016. His Excellency Minister Hisham Tawfi was assigned as the Minister of Public Business Sector last year in mid of June 2018. And since he was assigned, he has just instructed that a new vision with a new strategy has to be adopted. He said he will never speak about the public enterprises for the coming couple of months before we do a clear evaluation of the current situation. We had professionals assisting the ministry in doing a detailed SWOT analysis for each and every affiliate company. Of course, each company has its own strengths and weaknesses, yet the opportunities and risks that may face the sector may be common between several companies working in some fields. We did that SWOT analysis and we started to put our new vision for a new strategy for enhancing efficiency and transparency in the public enterprises under the supervision of the Ministry of Public Business Sector. First, we have to define or to agree that not all the loss-making companies are distressed. We only have 26 distressed companies. Around 90% of the loss-making, the 7.5, coming out of only 26 companies. And those companies had each of them a plan for restructuring technically and administratively in order to just limit the losses and see what we can do with them. Also, the profitable companies have their potential to make more profits. So we had to study well each and every company in order to put its own strategy for the coming few years. We had to work on different channels in parallel because not only the companies need restructuring in the technology and machines and equipment, we need to have a foundation for the procedures and the law of 203, which was issued back in 1991. And we had to review some of the articles of the law in order to set the right legislative atmosphere for the companies to operate in better efficiency and transparency. And some of those articles will make the companies operate like the private sector ones because more opportunity will be for expert people to be in the board of directors in the affiliate companies, which currently have half of the board being elected from the employees. One of our main recommendations to modify the law in order to have a better representation of the private sector and the expertise people in the board of directors of the affiliates. Again, we had to look at the people that they are working in our companies, because we cannot reform our companies or inject new money in a better projects or investments before we make sure that we have on board well-expertised people to make this dream happen. So we had to evaluate all the CEO, the current ones, and put a clear system of evaluation with clear KPIs in order for them, the CEO, and for us to follow up on their performance. And the same system will be applied on any new recruitment for any CEO to be on board in our affiliates. We had to look at our employee structure and the wage structure to put a better appraisal for the employees and make all the wages related to the productivity, and that will be implemented on all the affiliates. We had to do internal audit for the companies, and we had to apply the ERP system because a lot of our companies didn't have such a system. And we are at the ministry level adopting to implement the ERP system in around 60 to 70 affiliates in order to have a clear reporting system, not only for the human resources, the operations, the production, purchases, every single department will be linked on that system in order to better follow up on the performance. We will be focusing more about the marketing of the companies because a lot of our companies has potential to grow and to enter new markets internationally, yet they don't have the know-how of how to make good marketing and branding for their products and services. Centralized units will be established in each holding company in order to help its affiliates in doing the right marketing locally and internationally. This administrative and legalized reform will be in parallel with the technical reform. We have studied all of our affiliates who needs urgently to have a reform and restructuring products. We have a consolidated program to restructuring the spinning and weaving sector, as well as other sectors. Each sector by case, will be having a restructuring program of its own. We have looked at the unutilized assets in order to better manage all the assets of the affiliates. We need to get rid of unutilized assets or even the assets that are utilized in an inefficient way, in order to avail the finance for any historical debt or paying back any dues on the companies and make their balance sheet look better and make some finance available for the restructuring and investment projects. So we have to move fast in different channels, making all the base of the legislative and administrative base is in a right track, and we have the right people on board, and we inject more money in some distressed companies in order to move in a better track for a more reform strategy for all our public enterprises. Thank you.
Thank you, Rasha, for a very good presentation on the efforts that are being done. And I'm going to refrain my comments until I hear from Mr. Mohsen Gilany, who happened to be the chair of the Textile Holding Company, a key holding company within the public sector that has always been having problems and had the biggest losses and had issues all the time. So this is hands-on experience on problems associated with the public sector. Please.
أنا آسف، أنا هتكلم باللغة العربية عشان أقدر أعبر في الوقت القصير ده عن اللي أنا عايز أقوله. في حاجة في هندسة الصوت هنا، الصدى الصوت الواحد مش قادر الحقيقة يعني أنا هتكلم بصفة خاصة عن قطاع الغزل والنسيج بشقيه العام والخاص. لما حد بنتكلم على تطوير الغزل والنسيج بيتبادر للذهن على طول ان يبقى احنا بنتكلم على اكاديميا، بنتكلم على الشركات الحكوميه او القطاع العام. الكلام ده مش مظبوط او مش دقيق، لان دلوقتي حصل متغيرات كثيره جدا في الفتره اللي فاتت او في ال20 سنه اللي فاتوا، وخلى النسب اللي بتتقال وبتعلن عن مساهمه القطاع الحكومي مع القطاع الخاص، النسب دي تحتاج الى اعاده نظر، لا تغيرت كثيرا خالص. يعني انا اقدر اقول كده وانا مطمن خالص ان لا توجد اي غلبه في اي قطاع في الغزل، في النسيج، في الصباغه والتجهيز، في الملابس، لا توجد اي غلبه خالص لقطاع الاعمال فيه. الموضوع محتاج ان يحصل اعاده تقييم مره اخرى لمساهمه القطاع الحكومي بالنسبه للقطاع الخاص، لان ده يعني طبعا قد يكون الوقت يعني فات عشان نقول هذا الكلام، انما الحقيقه دي لازم تتقال عشان نعرف احنا فين بالظبط، احنا واقفين عند ايه بالظبط. التوجه اللي موجود دلوقتي الحمد لله، هناك اراده سياسيه قويه جدا للاصلاح، وده ما كانش متوفر قبل كده. يعني في الفتره اللي انا قعدت فيها من سنه 2002 ل 2012 ما كانش هذا التوجه موجود. كان التوجه هو عمل داون سايزنج للقطاع، والداون سايزنج ده يعني كان دايما يقال لنا يعني قلل حجم العماله واعمل داون سايزنج واقفل. بعد ما طبعا قلل حكايه ان احنا نقفل ديت، اتقالت بعد ما فشل حكايه الخصخصه. يعني الخصخصه ليس سرا ان يعني برنامج الخصخصه ما اتباعش الا عدد قليل جدا من الشركات، وبقيه الشركات ما زالت موجوده. الشركات معظمها ما زالت موجوده في حوزه الحكومه. النهارده ما دام في اراده سياسيه موجوده للاصلاح واراده سياسيه موجوده للاستثمار، انا عن نفسي ما اعرفش تفاصيل الخطه بتاعه الاصلاح ايه، انما كل المعلومات اللي انا اعرفها او خدتها من التصريحات في الاعلام، وقد تكون غير دقيقه، انما في ملامح معينه اللي انا فهمته من التصريحات. الملامح الاوليه ان الخطه ستعتمد اعتماد رئيسي او كلي على القط المصري، في استخدام القط المصري. ده حسب التصريحات اللي انا بقراها في الجورنال، انا مش متاكد، انا ما شفتش خطه. الكلام ده يعني انا شخصيا عليه ملاحظات كثيره جدا، لان اذا قلنا انها معتمده على القط المصري يبقى احنا بنتكلم على سوق ضيق، سوق نيش ماركت، سوق ضيق جدا وخطر لانه يتعرض لمتقلبات كثيره جدا. اذا اشتغلنا في 98% من السوق نحن امنون، انما اذا اشتغلنا على 2% من السوق العالمي نحن لسنا في مأمن، لان ده بيتاثر كتير جدا بالوضع الاقتصادي، بيتاثر بتقلبات كثيره جدا. يعني انما اللي بيشتغل في العيش ضامن انه هيبيع، اللي بيشتغل في حاجه ارقى شويه يعني قد يجوز ان يبقى السوق اب اند داون. برضو بالنسبه للي انا بسمعه من الخطه، في حاجات كتيره جدا محتاجه توضيح. يعني انا عن نفسي متبرع بوقتي ان انا يعني، بس انا شايف ان الوقت فات خلاص، فات الاوان لهذا. انما يعني انا شايف ان الكلام اللي بيتقال من ناحيه حجم الاستثمار ومن ناحيه الارباح التي نتوقعها من هذا الاستثمار، يعني انا بشتغل في الصناعه دي بقالي 50 سنه اكتر، يعني انا نقلت على حاجه تانية انما بشتغل فيها بقالي 50 سنه. يعني استحاله بالمبالغ حتى الكبيره اللي بتتقال انها تصرف انها تعمل 3 مليار مكسب، استحاله. يعني ده من رابع المستحيلات اذا كنا هنشتغل على البيزك تكستايل. البيزك تكستايل يعني الغزل والنسيج، ما بنشتغلش على نوفوتيهات، بنشتغل على حاجه الناس كلها بتعملها. ما صعب جدا جدا هذا الكلام. وبعدين اللي بيشتغل في البيزك تكستايل اعلى ربح له ممكن يحققه لو هو شاطر 5% على السيلز، 5% على المبيعات. يبقى معنى كده لما بنتكلم على 3 مليار ربح، يبقى انا عايز ابيع ب 60 مليار. انا ما اعرفش يعني ازاي ان احنا هنبيع ب 60 مليار وفي 2.5 سنين واحنا النهارده بنتكلم على 1.7 او 1.8. انا مش فاهمها بصراحه يعني.
من مصر كلها ولا من القطاع العام؟
لا انا بتكلم دلوقتي على القطاع العام. انا بالقطاع العام يعني انا في الاول قلت ان احنا عايزين تدقيق على مساهمه القطاع الخاص، لان القطاع الخاص ده قضيه كبيره قوي. يعني انا افضل ان تتعمل دراسه وانتوا اللي تعملوها حضراتكم. ليه بقى؟ لان يعني ايه، عشان بس نعرف احنا بنتكلم على ايه وحجمه ايه. يعني بالرغم من ان احنا كان في اخر العهد يعني نقول ايه، قبل الثوره مباشره كان وصلنا لقناعه، وكان ساعتها احنا اللي بيشرف علينا كان المهندس رشيد بعد الدكتور محمود محي الدين ما اتنقل للبنك الدولي. كان اقتنع بان هو 4 5 شركات يركز عليهم والباقي يعني نصف فيه. ولو حضرتك رجعتي يعني محمد بيه مشي محمد باسم لو حضرتك رجعتي للاستراتيجيه بتاعت اللي كان عاملها شركه جيرسي 2020 كان مكتوب فيها صراحه ان مش هيتفضل الا شركه ولا 2 في نهايه 2020. لما حصلت الثوره رجع جددوها قالوا 2022، ولا 2020 اتحققت ولا 2022 اتحققت. الكلام اللي بينقال محتاج عدد تدقيق، لان احنا ايه طبعا انا برضو يعني بحاول الم مواضيع ما عنديش حاجه سوليد اتكلم عليها يعني. حضرتك الكلام اللي بينقال انا نفسي بقول كراجل تكنيكال مان يعني ان في 2.5 سنين نقدر نعمل كل هذا الانجاز حتى لو توفرت الامكانيات. حتى هذا صعب جدا يعني. ده كلام يعني محض خيال بالعربي يعني كده من الاخر. اسف ان انا اقول هذه الكلمه يعني. حضرتك انت كنت كان فيه معالي رئيس مجلس الوزراء المهندس شريف اسماعيل كان عمل لجنه، واعتقد حضرتك كان لك دور جامد جدا في وضع الايتمز اللي تدرس في هذه اللجنه. كانت معموله للقطن ثم توسعت انها شملت كل حاجات كتيره في الغزل والنسيج. التوصيات اللي طلعت في اللجنه ديت ما زالت صالحه حتى الان، حتى في الظروف دي ما زالت صالحه. اللي اتقال لم يحدث اي شيء يدعو ان احنا نغير الكلام اللي اتقال في هذه اللجنه. الكلام اللي اتقال ان احنا عايزين نعتمد على قطن متوسط التيله في صناعه الغزل والنسيج ما زال صالح حتى الان. ما زال ما حصلش فيه حاجه يعني. الكلام برضو حتى احنا بعد ما قلنا هذا الكلام اللي بيتقال ان احنا نزرع على قد ما يمكن ان نحسن استخدامه في الداخل زائد اللي ممكن نصدره، وما نزودش عن كده، لان زودنا عن كده الاسعار هتنهار وبتنزل. حصل بعد ما قلنا هذا الكلام رجعوا زودوا المساحات وقالوا هنرجع القطن المصري لعرشه والكلام الشعارات ده، وفي الاخر حصل نفس المشكله تاني ان القطن بات وما اتباعش وما زال عامل مشكله. يعني الكلام اللي اتقال احنا مش معقوله كل مره نرجع لنقطه الصفر تاني. يعني ده كلام مش هنتقدم، مش هينفع كده. مش هينفع ان كل شويه ان احنا نقول الكلام ونوصل لنتيجه والنتيجه تبقى معروفه قدامنا وبعدين ننساها ونرجع تاني نعمل حاجه تانيه خالص او نكرر نفس الاخطاء مره اخرى. القطن المصري نقول تاني، القطن المصري ده قطن قيم جدا بس هو غالي. بالرغم ان هو اعلى في الجوده من القطن البيمه بيتباع اغلى مننا لسبب رئيسي، وهو ان القطن بتاعنا ملوث، في تلوثات. هذه التلوثات بتخلينا نبيعه اقل في السعر رغم انه اجود من البيمه. انما القطن المصري والقطن البيمه واللي زيهم على مستوى العالم لا يتعدى 2% من اقطان العالم. شيء طبيعي ان دولت مني طيب مش خلاص يعني انا تقريبا يعني حاولت اغطي معظم الكلام اللي انا عايز اقوله. متشكرين جدا، شكرا.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mohsen. What we heard is the plan of the ministry from an institutional perspective, and then we heard a detailed case for the key sector in the public sector that is facing problems, realistic problems. And the question is whether the reforms that are taking place are addressing this dimension or not, besides the fact of having actually scientifically correct process. But and I'm sure you would want to answer, but not now. We are going to leave this after the discussion. So I thank of the down-to-earth experience. Now, let us step out of Egypt again now. Okay, we start with the OECD experience. We looked at with a focus on the case of Egypt. Let us step out of Egypt and go to a lovely country. Okay, I know that, Portugal, with a lovely ambassador. Okay, and ask about what has been done. Yes, and ask what has been done in Portugal in the same.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? No?
OECD has a crucial role in that. As you may know, Portugal is one of the founding members of the OECD, and also in our history, this was an organization, actually, as the colleague said, OECD is a database, but it's a very important organization for the countries that are going through a process of reforms. In our case, we had until 74. We were living in a dictatorship, and after the revolution, we were living very troubled times, like Egypt, until the beginning of the 80s. And OECD was really one of the main organizations that helped us through the sharing of experience with other countries to define the way we would like to go. This is also the reason why Portugal is very supportive of Egypt right now to have a counter program, because we believe this is the right path for countries like, for example, Morocco. Morocco has already this counter program to guide, to share with you our experiences, our lessons learned. One of the areas that you mentioned is Portuguese experience with our Simplex program. Actually, this is one of the pillars of a broader agenda for the modernization of the Portuguese administration that started at the beginning of 2000 and then in a more structured way in 2006. Two main ideas were behind this modernization program. The one was on the micro level to ensure that the public administration can provide a prompt and an effective response to the needs of the people, to the needs of the business people and to the needs of the citizens. And the other idea was on the macro level, the perception that by reducing the context-related costs for the companies, for the business people, but also for the citizens, we will boost the country's economic performance and competitiveness of our economy. So with these two main ideas, we started to devise a program with three main objectives. The first one was to make citizens and business everyday life easier. The second one was to look at the business context for the companies and to ensure that the companies can obtain licenses and permits more quickly and easily, and they can also comply with their obligations in a more easily way. And the third one was to rationalize the public administration, because of course the public administration has a very important role to play, and so we realize that it's absolutely crucial to have a public administration that is more efficient, more initiative that can promote a better integration of the different services and can work on a platform of interoperationality. With this in mind, we started to design this program, which is known by Simplex. It's a very easy word, it's coming from simple. So very quickly it was possible for the public opinion also to understand what was the aim of the program and to start every year, every public body in the public administration has to devise and has to propose the simplification of measures, for example, has to propose also a detailed program with deadlines for their implementation. Of course, we are speaking about very different kinds of measures. We are speaking about simplification of laws and procedures. We are speaking also about full redesigning of some processes. We are speaking about the possibility to combine the database from the different services, mobilizing human and technical resources. So it's a very broad agenda of measures that we are talking about. This started, as I told you, in 2006, and in 2016 we started the second generation of this program because we felt that this is a never-ending story. I mean, there is always something that we can improve. There is always new measures that we should elaborate. And so 2015, 2016, we started to go back to the people, to the public administration, to the public services, also at the local level, to the business associations, to the citizens, and ask them, what do you think we should improve? What do you think we should change in this program? And from that evaluation that took some months, there was a mobile team that was going around the country and contacting a lot of people. It was possible to redesign the program and to modernize the program. So I think as the colleague from the OECD mentioned, this program in Portugal has achieved some very good results, and that's why it is also internationally recognized by the OECD, and that this is really a very high-profile initiative. This is in a way a case study that shows how if you have the political will, you can really allocate the necessary resources to make it a success. If you ask me, how do you explain the success of this program in Portugal, I would say that I have good news and bad news. Starting with the bad news, two remarks. The first one is that people don't like to make reforms. We have to have this very clear in our mind. I was working very directly with the Vice Prime Minister during the years of our financial assistance program. As you know, Portugal was one of the European countries that was having some bad times with the financial international crisis that started in 2008. So between 2011 and 2013, we had a financial assistance program from IMF and European institutions. And during this time, it was particularly This agenda became really a priority goal for the Portuguese government for more than a decade. We have had different governments, different political parties, but this was always a very important goal. And this is really not minor elements, because you have to convince people this is really the right path to go. The second remark, the second aspect I would like to stress is the authority. It is very important that it is clear that this is a priority for the government, and in our case, it was like that this is a program that is under the direct supervision of the Prime Minister. There is a minister, the Minister of the Presidency of the Council, who is in charge, is the political responsible in charge, but is under the direct supervision of the Prime Minister. And this is very important if you want to achieve the coordination among the different institutions, among the different agencies, among the central public administration and the local administration. People have to feel this is really a command from the Prime Minister. The third aspect is the financial strategy. As the colleague from the OECD also pointed out, even during the difficult times of our adjustment program, it has been possible to assure that we had the necessary financial flows for this program. Of course, we benefited very much from the fact that we are a member of the European Union, and there is, of course, the structural financial needs also for that aim. The fourth reference is the institutional framework. This is also very important to have a clear institutional framework, not only on the political level, as I told you, Prime Minister and Minister that are in charge, but then also other institutions. In our case, it is a public agency, the public agency for the modernization of the administration, and they have a very important role because they are the ones who are in charge of the sharing knowledge, promoting institutional learning. They are the ones who assure the coordination role of the whole administration, and also to assign the necessary resources, human, technical, and financial. And of course, the capacity building is in this sense one of the most important ones. And this agency also provides support for the capacity building for the people who are in charge at the low level of the implementation of the program. The fifth element, I would say, is the engagement of services in public servants. And again, from my direct experience, people tend to be a little bit reluctant to share information. We know we have these problems in every country. People tend to keep the information for themselves, not to share enough. And coordination is absolutely fundamental, is crucial. Coordination among the different services, sharing of information. And so one of the most important aspects to achieve sustainable results is really that the public services also feel that they are part of the process. They have to feel at the end of the day, this will improve my work as a public servant, and this will improve also the achievements of the public administration. And finally, last aspect, which is also a very important one, and which is one of the best tools we have nowadays, is the use of the new technologies. New technologies is a very, very important aspect. It's not the only one, and with only this one we are not able to reach our objectives, but it is very important to guarantee that the public administration can use this in a way that it will improve the daily life of citizens and companies. Thank you.
the authority, one of the Ministry of Planning is facing is that it has, along with it, the administrative development. And you cannot have administrative development of the government on the same level by the same ministry. Why would I listen to anybody who wants to change? Okay, I mean, I tell them you have to change yourself. Why should I listen to you? You're a minister just like me. So this is where the higher level comes in. The financial thing, if you don't have the finance, you cannot do it. At a certain point, the Ministry of Education started a very big program on the basis of $500 million a grant from the actually part grant, part loan from the World Bank. And there it was not clear if the government is going to assign more money to this. So how can it possibly continue? The institutional framework is obvious, of course, beyond that. The cascading of everything to the lower level, the care for the citizens, the human being, I think, is the core and the beneficiary of any development. And any development that does not see the people, it's not going very far. Okay, the engagement of everybody, they have to have a benefit. Okay, here we don't have the engagement, and the ones who are doing the reform are the same ones who were benefiting from the old system. So how can they change? And then finally, obviously, the technology and the access to the information. So I thank you very much for that. We've had on the panel two things that are very, very clear. The experience of the OECD countries collectively, a case study of Portugal with a very successful story on how to improve the system. We've had the efforts of the Ministry of the Enterprise sector, which, to be very honest, is trying to follow an approach which is different from previously. It's not an issue of privatization, it's an issue of assessing each and every case and taking it one at a time to see who needs to stay and who needs to go without any feelings or suppression of the people, okay? To what extent is this complete, to what extent it's going to work out is questionable, because as Mr. Mohsen said, there are details that we don't know. We have not seen the fabric out yet. We heard the plan, but we have not seen the fabric. And we had a case study of the heart of the public enterprise sector, and that's the textile sector, which has been suffering and undergoing changes, and sort of everything that the public sector, the government wanted to experiment with in the public sector, they start with the textile sector. And they start with that, and then they continue with the rest. So they were subject to all kinds of experimentation of privatization and others. Let me open the floor on interventions, please, on these issues and others within that title. Ambassador Khaled Shama, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abla, and thank you for organizing this event, actually, with the OECD, and for,
can you get the mic closer
and for
to
the
your
excellent panel. The title in itself, very captivating, right to the point, but I think we need to point it down to something tangible. In what Ambassador Madalena Fischer mentioned with regard to the program that they implemented, the purpose of it, this is relating to what you said, that anything that does not see the people at the end of it is useless. The objective here was to make businesses and people's everyday life easier. And let me add here, better. How does that relate to what we were discussing previously on informality? On informality, some key points that we need to take into consideration. Why is informality high in the country or in the region? That's an element that needs to be looked at. And the decision to go informal. Our distinguished member of parliament mentioned that this is part of a cultural setting. I think we need to elaborate more. What do you mean by a cultural setting? In simple terms, for part of the informality, which also needs to be defined when we talk about informality, what is it that we talk about? Street peddlers, Ataba Square, this is one. But also you have other types of informal activities. Small-holding farmers that provide, that's part of the value chain that Dr. Sholami mentioned. So you need really to go deep into dissecting that notion of informality to be able to deal with it. So what drives them to it? It relates to our topic now, which is efficiency of public institutions and processes. An idea. What do we mean by processes? Why do people go to informality? To evade red tape, evade processes that overburden them? Is it tax evasion? Is it red tape evasion? That needs to be looked at. That is a process. That is about a process. So we need to look at it. How about e-sales? WhatsApp group sales? How informal is that? There was a question or a point that was raised. Why do we need to formalize the economy? Why don't we simply embrace it? Dr. Sholami, I think, mentioned that. Well, in part, to protect both the vendors or whoever is doing the activity, but also the clients, the rest of society. It's for the sake of regulation. So it is a win-win situation. But for it to be a win-win situation, you need to work on easing the procedures, the process of action and activity for those. Same thing relates to equality, because mind you, and that's my last point, when you talk about informality, you're talking about actually two different sets of ecosystems. Those who work within the formal sector, those who are part of the development drive, and those who are purely informal. So you need to bring that informal part in order to reduce inequality. So as a matter of fact, both topics are very much linked together, and the two of them are the core of what we call nowadays Sustainable Development Goals, which we repeat so often that sometimes we forget what is the basic notion of it, which is human beings. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Informality is a cross-section of everything, and it will come and will emerge here and there. And we'll definitely add all of these comments to the part of the first session and this one. Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for ECES and OECD for organizing such a very interesting and timely workshop and discussion. My name is Omar from European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. I would just like to add one dimension that I haven't seen explored so far. In my mind, reforms might have kind of two sequencing. You have the short, medium-term reforms, and we have seen in Egypt we have some macroeconomic imbalances that really needed timely measures and to be tackled, and they were done successfully. The exchange rate, eventually adjustment, fiscal consolidation, all this, as Dr. Ahmed already had said, is kind of the easy part. But when we look at reforms, actually, and maybe this is why we failed in 74 and 91 and 2003 to really build the momentum, in my mind, we need a very long strategy, vision, on where we would like to be 30, 50 years from now. The world is evolving so fast, and we really need to understand where the world is going to be in 30 years. And start from now thinking all together where we would like to see Egypt eventually fitting in this global value chain that will prevail in 30, 50 years from now. So I think what ECES is doing is actually excellent in terms of a think tank. We have the government, really, they have very talented colleagues. We have a very strong leadership who is really willing to implement a vision. We have IFIs, we can see OECD, EBRD, World Bank. I think if we all sit together and try to brainstorm where we would like to see the future of Egypt and try to build the reforms tailored to achieve this long-term objective, maybe we're going to have a kind of a strategy to build on and to move step by step and eventually, hopefully, succeed in the long term. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. This is critical. We are fixing now our Vision 2030, and 2030 is literally tomorrow. Okay? And then when you have different governments or different ministers, nobody's abiding to this framework because there are issues there. Okay, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Abla. Thank you. I would like to raise the importance of this session. Can you hear me?
Can we give him a different mic, please? This mic is not good. We made an effort.
Hello? Thank you very much, Dr. Abla. Yes, this is better. Well, as a matter of fact, first of all, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Omar. I'm the Assistant Foreign Minister for International and Regional Multilateral Economic Affairs. This session tackled a very important topic related to efficiency of public institutions and processes. Some of the discussions rely more on the regulations and laws that tackled this issue. However, we forgot that the person who's in charge to implement these reforms is the public employee himself. And the public employee needs a real transformation or a big reform in his mentality, in his culture. Sometimes the law is very efficient, however, the performance lacks a real intervention, a real interpretation in real life. I think we need to focus more on the public employee, the way we recruit these people into public institutions, how they are aware about the real endeavor, the real mission, namely in public institutions who work more with the services. Because we end up by serving the individuals, the people themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think what you're saying is absolutely critical, but part of the problem lies in the fact that the laws are often involve a high degree of grayness and ambiguity. So it gives them room to make their own interpretation, and there you go with the disaster. But this is really an issue, and it's a complete reform. Again, back to your word about the whole government thing. Please.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to attend this event. Just to comment on your last point, Dr. Abla, related to the laws. Funny enough, in 2006, also Egypt started a program to look at the simplification of the laws and regulations, which was called Irada. Obviously, it did not reach what Simplex reached, but because it stopped, I think, in 2011. I think the whole idea at the time was quite close to what the Portuguese example is. Basically looking at 11 business activities, 11 ministries, looking at all the laws and regulations that govern these business activities, as well as the ministerial decrees, try to simplify the processes and have sort of a very simplified legal regime that govern these activities. I think a concrete sort of recommendation coming out of this event or the discussions could be to revive this Irada initiative. I found it, as a lawyer, I found it very interesting at the time that all the laws and regulations are collected and streamlined in one place. There is a sort of a book, a guide that would be delivered to all the employees in these ministries and all the people who deal with these ministries on what are the rules and regulations, because we find in a lot of instances that the law says something, as you were just mentioning, and then you have a ministerial decree that precedes the law, maybe even 30, 40 years before the law itself, that still is valid and contradicts in some aspects the law. You have sometimes even royal decrees that are still existing in some business activities that are contradicting with the laws themselves. I think the question is for the recommendation would be for this Irada initiative to be revived, to be at the level of the Prime Minister, because it used to be at the level of Minister Rashid. I think he did a great job together with Dr. Mahmoud at the time of really collecting all these laws, but they only stopped the collection. They need to be now streamlined. That's would be my, at least, personal recommendation. Just one other comment on the Ministry of, taking the topic of the Ministry of Public Enterprises. And I would like to say from a personal experience and working now on the IPO program that the government is undertaking, I find it very promising and very refreshing that the ministry is trying to adopt institutional reforms at the level of these companies, driven by the fact that the IPO program is being executed. So you find a lot of companies, obviously I'm not at all involved in the textile sector, but I think in at least the infrastructure sector and in the manufacturing sector, you see that corporate governance rules are being implemented for the purpose of the IPO. I think this example should be replicated across the board in all the different companies, because it really gives transparency on the information. When you start looking at the financial data of these companies, when you start looking at basically board members discussing the performance and all of that, I think this will eventually lead to reform of the ever problematic textile sector, but you need governance reform in the beginning of these companies, and then you can take the technical aspects. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you're absolutely right about Irada. The problem with Irada is that it's been, it's like a matchbox that's in the ocean like this. Sometimes it's after the minister. The minister is interested, it continues. The minister is not interested, it is thrown away. Okay? It needs to be at a much higher level, again, institutionally, and to make sure that it gets implemented irrespective of who is in charge of what. This is what we are missing, the vision that everybody is aligned with and complies with. It doesn't make any sense that every time we have a minister, he has a different view of things, right or wrong, it doesn't matter, okay? But it's not there. So we're absolutely, and it's not only the laws, by the way, that go 30 years back. It's the decrees, the committee decrees, I don't know what, and you have a chaos of legal infrastructure, okay? And of course, about the ministry and the efforts, very, very highly appreciated. And here comes, any other comments from the floor, please? Okay, no comments from the floor, so I'll go back to the Ministry of Enterprise, Public Enterprise. I'm sure you will want to respond to Mr. Gilany, but it's really very important to remember that this ministry has been problematic forever. Because there is always a political opinion that is an issue, okay? And how to be able to go through this jungle has always been a challenge, and one of this I appreciate very much focus realistically on life. We're stopping.
For the whole spinning and weaving sector. This study was finalized in 2014. So we don't change strategies by the change of ministers. We just consolidate on the successful strategies that suits the implementing time. So we found that the Warner strategy and the implementation of the reform program for the spinning and weaving still valid, still suits the local and the international threats and opportunities, and it is the good timing for implementing such a study. So again, there is no change of strategies as long as the strategy is effective and suits the right time of implementation. We don't have any more taboos. We had the national cement being liquidized after several years of loss making of $1 billion Egyptian pounds each year. And no authority whatsoever before had the strength and the will to say that we will liquidize such a company, being the last state-owned enterprise in the field of the cement after privatizing all the cement companies in the 90s. So if we don't see any potential in any company, even it's profitable now, yet it doesn't have any future, because we will not produce any product that doesn't suit the local or the international market anymore. So if we don't see any potential for the future of any company, we will be having the strength and even the political will in order to say, no, we will stop and we will liquidize such a business, and we will open new businesses, profitable one. Again, we are not working in isolated islands anymore. For the spinning and weaving restructuring program, we have a high-level ministerial committee involving the Minister of Agriculture, the private sector to work in the sectors that we are not efficient in. So it is a comprehensive strategy for a complete reform of the whole chain of spinning and weaving and textile industry, starting from agriculture till the trading of the ready-made garments. To have all the details of such a strategy, we need a seminar that might be we need to send all the information regarding such a sector because it has a lot of details that we really want to be transparent about and share with the concerned. The IPO program back since several years of not privatizing any company rather than underinvesting through the stock market. But yet, IPO is for better governance, stocks in the stock exchange. Again, the Ministry of Public Business Sector needs to put an effort putting a right base for better management of the assets of the state-owned enterprises. We don't own the assets. The holding companies are owned by the Ministry of Finance representing the state. Yet we are managing the assets, and we need to put the right foundation for the regulation.
Textile industry, cotton and all other fibers as well. Where is it that you want to go and where does the government fit? You have the cement factory that was liquidated. You have the cement sector having problems. Actually, at this point, we have new investments of cement that are being injected. Where is the overall vision? We are going to have a separate session for sure on words from you, sir. But I want to raise a small question that was not, you mentioned, but it was not raised in the discussion. And that has to do with the integrity and the anti-corruption. Do you see that it's appropriate for the countries to have anti-corruption as an end in itself, or does it have to come as part of the governance system? Because taking it out as if it's something that you can separate, it's actually emerged. I don't know what you think. Plus, of course, whatever else you want to say. Because we're going to lunch after that, and I still have
Thank you so much. And this is just at the heart of the problem of the discussion. If you look at the experience of the OECD and other countries, in a sense, corruption, I prefer to talk about integrity, which is a solution. Corruption is a scope, race, all types of misconduct. It's a risk. So the OECD countries, they take actually a more risk-based approach to identify where are these risks. Whether this is linked to regulatory capture, we talked about risk, whether this is linked to the spending program, actually this is one of the source of corruption. This is the OECD member countries, 6.4 trillion euros. This is the sum, huge amount of sum. Imagine the reflection. So in that sense, the OECD countries, they with the recommendation that you agree the vision, recommendation to mainstream this risk management, starting from the top level, so the exemplary role of the leaders, the political leaders, the managers. And what is the difference of this to be a very practical? It's not only the legislative institutional framework, how to make it real. We call it cultural implementation. Starting with, for example, with merit-based recruitment. We talk about professionalization, it's exactly the same. Various principles are part of the merit-based. And we talk about risk management and how to identify and make managers and leaders for decisions, etc. So very quickly reflecting some of the issues informally. These are informality is a symptom, and I fully agree with Sharon that finding solution means again mainstreaming this problem. Where are the constraints, whether this is linked to specific procedures, but mainly talk about small, medium, and individual micro. I can tell you that many countries they use the most simple registration process using ICT, half an hour, making this register compatible for each of the tenders, not repeating again, filling in forms, automatically register for all future. At the same time, because this is electronic payment, it's not only traceable. I can tell examples for small medium enterprises. This is within 48 hours. In general, this can up to 4 hours in Korea for small medium enterprises. So after delivery, 4 hours for small medium. Register with those who are in the so-called formal. So these are exactly the incentives how to make this happen.
مفيش حاجه تتقال ان احنا نتمنى لجميع التوفيق ومع الاسف احنا قدام مشكله او قدام حاجه مش هنعرف اذا كانت هي سكسسفول ولا سكسسفول الا اخر ابلكيشن ويبقى يحصل بعدها وقت مش عايز اقول مثال يعني انما ايه يعني وهاف تو ويت انما انا من خبرتي قلت ان انا يعني خلاص ضميري قلت ان انا اعرف
Thank you very much. And now the last comment is coming from Her Excellency, the Ambassador of Portugal, the sweet end of the session.
reform process is a never-ending story because the world changes so quickly, and nowadays we are experiencing this. Also on ITC level, the things that we are now using on a daily basis. 5 years ago, it was really something absolutely new. So this will require from everybody, from the public companies, from the public administration, from the companies, really a big effort to be able to always have a fresh look into the reality and to find the best solutions for everybody. On this informality of the economy, this is also something where we have sometimes to think out of the box. And just to give you a small example, we had also a big problem some years ago with the fiscal system and taxation. And one of the things was the VAT. Because of course, if you are going to take a coffee and in Portugal, the whole day you take these small expressos, yeah, this is part of our culture. You don't pay the VAT. So one of the things we introduced some years ago was a kind of auction where you can have as a big prize car. Every week the tax system, the tax administration is making an auction with all the receipts that you get when you want something new, and so every week a Portuguese citizen gets a new car. And this, of course, changed absolutely the habits of the people. So nowadays, you go to have a coffee which costs perhaps 50 cents, and you want to have, the factura, because this is the proof that you can participate in this auction. So sometimes these are really new ideas, out of the box, but they bring real changes. And the last remark I would like to make is really, I think, as a foreigner in this country, a word of recognition for the work you have been doing. And everybody, starting from the ECES that is doing a fantastic work, until the government, because to achieve reforms in a country like Egypt with 100 million people, and I'm coming from a country with 10 million people, and I can tell you by experience how difficult it is to achieve a reform program. So really, I think we have to recognize that you are doing a fantastic work, and that everybody, and I speak for Portugal of course, but I think I can also speak for the OECD and Europe in this sense. We are here also to support you and to help you to achieve this goal. Thank you very much.
Definitely going to pick you up on that, and we're going to look very carefully at the Portuguese experience and benefit from it, and ECES we're going to collaborate and discuss this. I would like to thank